The gunshot echoed across the moonlit prairie as Eli Xander pressed his back against the weathered barn, his breath forming clouds in the cold Arizona night. The year was 1878, and his face was plastered on wanted posters from Seligman to Tucson, a price hefty enough to tempt even honest men. Blood trickled from the graze on his shoulder, but it wasn't the wound that concerned him, it was the sound of someone else's breathing coming from inside the abandoned structure. "Whoever you are," he whispered, cocking his Colt revolver, "I ain't looking for trouble tonight." A rustling came from behind a stack of hay, followed by the unmistakable click of a shotgun. "That's unfortunate," came a woman's voice, steady despite its softness. "Because trouble seems to have found both of us." Eli kept his gun trained on the shadows. "Show yourself, madam." Slowly, a figure emerged from the darkness. She was tall and slender, with hair the color of burnt copper tied back in a practical braid. Her clothes were dusty from travel, but there was no mistaking the quality of her riding jacket or the determined set of her jaw. The shotgun in her hands didn't waver. "Name's Josephine Harlow," she said, eyes narrowed in suspicion. "And you're bleeding on my temporary accommodations." Eli managed a pained smile. "Eli Xander. And I believe I was here first. You're also that cowboy they're hunting. $5,000, if the posters in Seligman are accurate." Her gaze flicked to the door, then back to him. "They're coming up the road now." Sure enough, the distant thunder of hooves grew louder. Eli cursed under his breath. The wound was slowing him down, and now he had this woman to deal with. He expected her to turn him in. $5,000 would set someone up nicely. Instead, she lowered her shotgun. "There's a root cellar. It'll hide too if we're quick about it." Eli's brow furrowed. "Why would you help me?" Josephine's expression hardened. "Because those men out there want me dead almost as much as they want you. Now move." Without waiting for a response, she shifted a worn rug to reveal a trapdoor. Eli hesitated only a moment before holstering his gun and helping her lift it. The cellar below was cramped and smelled of damp earth, but it was their only option. They descended just as lantern light flooded through the barn's windows. As they huddled together in the darkness, the sound of boots stomping overhead, Eli realized he wasn't the only one with secrets. Josephine Harlow was running too, and somehow, their paths had crossed in this forgotten corner of the Arizona territory. "What did you do?" he whispered, close enough to feel her breath on his cheek. In the dim light filtering through the cracks of the trapdoor, he saw her lips curve into a bitter smile. "I survived," she whispered back. "Some men don't take kindly to that." Above them, the posse searched the barn, turning over hay bales and checking the horse stalls. A man's voice, low and menacing, rose above the others. "Find them. Xander can't have gone far with that wound, and the woman's tracks led here. 5,000 for him and a private reward for her. Alive if possible, but I won't shed tears either way." Josephine's hand found Eli's in the darkness, her grip tight with fear despite her stoic expression. They remained motionless, barely breathing, as dust filtered down from the floorboards above. For nearly an hour, the men searched until finally, convinced the barn was empty, they moved on to check the surrounding properties. When silence finally settled, Eli released the breath he'd been holding. "They'll be back at dawn." "Then we'd best be gone by then," Josephine replied, already climbing the ladder. They emerged into the barn, now illuminated by moonlight streaming through the open door. Eli studied his unexpected ally with new interest. She moved with purpose, gathering her few belongings that had been scattered by the search. "You're handy with that shotgun," he observed. "My father taught me," said a woman alone needs to protect herself. She glanced at his shoulder. "You need that tended to before we move." "We?" Eli raised an eyebrow. "I don't recall inviting company on my journey," Miss Harlow. And I don't recall asking permission, Mr. Xander. She approached him with a clean cloth from her saddlebag. Besides, they're hunting both of us now. 2 guns are better than 1. As she cleaned his wound with practiced hands, Eli couldn't help but ask, "What's your story? Why is there a private reward for you?" Josephine's eyes darkened. Edgar Walsh. Wealthy cattle baron near Flagstaff. He wanted a wife. I declined. He took exception to my refusal. And her hands paused in their work. And when he tried to force the issue, I shot him. Not fatally, unfortunately. Now his pride is wounded worse than his leg. And he's determined to make an example of me. Eli winced as she applied pressure to his wound. Sounds like we both have powerful enemies. The worst kind, men who believe they're entitled to whatever they desire. She finished bandaging his shoulder. What about you? What warrants $5,000 on your head? Eli's face hardened. I killed 3 men. All worked for the Southwestern Railroad Company. All deserved it. That's not the full story. No, he admitted. But it's all you get for now. He stood, testing his arm. We need horses. There's a small ranch about a mile east. The owner died last winter. His horses might still be in the pasture if no one's claimed them yet. Eli nodded. We'll go there, then head south. I know a place in the mountains where we can lie low until things cool down. And then what? Josephine asked, slinging her shotgun over her shoulder. Eli had no answer. He'd been running for 6 months, with no end in sight. The price on his head ensured that every bounty hunter and lawman in the territory was looking for him. And now this woman was in the same boat, tied to his fate by circumstance. One day at a time, Miss Harlow, he finally said. First, we survive. They slipped out of the barn into the cool night, 2 shadows moving across the landscape. The stars above provided just enough light to navigate by as they made their way east, away from the searching posse. Both were strangers, both hunted, both with nothing left to lose except perhaps their lives. Neither could have known that this chance meeting in an abandoned barn outside Seligman would change everything. The abandoned ranch was just as Josephine had described, a small homestead with a collapsed roof on the main house and a weathered corral containing 3 horses that looked up nervously as they approached. Eli moved slowly, speaking in low tones until a chestnut gelding allowed him to slip a rope around its neck. You know horses, Josephine observed, as she managed to catch a sturdy bay mare. Raised on a ranch in Texas before the war, Eli replied, fashioning a makeshift bridle from rope. My father bred some of the finest quarter horses in the state. What happened to it? Eli's expression closed off. Same thing that happened to most Texas ranches when the Yankees came through. Nothing but ashes now. They worked in silence after that, finding enough tack in the dilapidated stable to outfit their mounts. The 3rd horse, a young black stallion too wild to be caught quickly, watched them from the far side of the corral. Shame to leave him, Eli said. He'd fetch a good price. We're not horse thieves, Josephine reminded him. No, just a murderer and a woman who shot a powerful man, Eli retorted with a wry smile. Much more respectable. Despite the dire circumstances, Josephine laughed, a genuine sound that transformed her face. Eli found himself staring, noticing for the first time the constellation of freckles across her nose and the way her eyes crinkled at the corners. Which way south? She asked, interrupting his thoughts as she mounted the bay mare. Eli swung onto the chestnut, wincing as the movement pulled at his wounded shoulder. We'll follow the ridgeline, stay off the main trails. It's slower but safer. They rode through the remainder of the night, pushing the horses as much as they dared on unfamiliar terrain. As dawn broke over the eastern horizon, they found themselves looking down on a lush valley, a ribbon of water cutting through its center. Verde River, Eli said. We'll follow it southeast, then cut into the Mazatzel Mountains. You seem to know this territory well for a Texan, Josephine observed. 6 months on the run teaches you the landscape, he replied. And I did some honest cowboying in these parts before. He trailed off, his expression darkening. Before whatever happened with the railroad men, she finished for him. Eli nodded but offered no further explanation. They descended into the valley, letting their horses drink from the river before continuing. The day grew warm, the Arizona sun beating down relentlessly. By midday, they needed to rest, finding shade beneath a cluster of cottonwood trees. As they shared the meager provisions Josephine had in her saddlebag, Eli studied her. You still haven't told me why you were hiding in that barn. Josephine chewed thoughtfully before answering. After I shot Walsh, I knew I couldn't stay in Flagstaff. His reach is too long there. I took what I could carry and headed west, thinking I might make it to California. She shrugged. I've been moving from town to town, taking odd jobs where I could. When I heard Walsh's men were in Seligman asking questions, I decided to lay low outside town. What did you do in Flagstaff? Before Walsh, I was a schoolteacher. A sad smile touched her lips. I loved it. The children, the books, all of it. Eli looked surprised. You don't strike me as a schoolteacher. And what does a schoolteacher strike you as, Mr. Xander? There was challenge in her voice. Not someone who can handle a shotgun like you do. My father was a widower. He raised me to be self-sufficient. Her eyes took on a faraway look. He always said, Josie, in this world, a woman needs education and ammunition in equal measure. Wise man. He was. Died 2 years ago. That's when Walsh started his pursuit. Thought without my father's protection, I'd be an easy conquest. Her jaw tightened. He was mistaken. Eli couldn't help but admire her spirit. Most women in her position would have given in to a wealthy suitor like Walsh, especially without family to rely on. Josephine Harlow had chosen a harder path and was paying the price for her independence. We should move, he said, standing and offering her his hand. We've still got a lot of ground to cover before nightfall. As she took his hand, their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of shared defiance against a world that had dealt them both poor hands. They continued southeast along the river, keeping to the treeline to avoid being spotted from the ridges above. The terrain grew rougher as they approached the mountains, forcing them to dismount and lead the horses over rocky patches. There's a cabin about 4 miles into these foothills, Eli explained as they picked their way carefully upward. Belongs to an old prospector named Clayton. He only uses it during winter months. And he won't mind us borrowing it. Clayton owes me a favor. I saved his life during a flash flood last year. Eli paused, helping Josephine navigate a particularly steep section. Besides, he's probably in Prescott spending his latest gold findings on whiskey and women. The sun was setting by the time they reached the cabin, a sturdy one-room structure built against the side of the mountain. It was simple but solid, with a stone fireplace and shuttered windows. Home sweet home, Eli murmured, pushing open the door. At least for now. Josephine stepped inside, taking in the sparse furnishings: a bed, a table with 2 chairs, some shelves stocked with basic provisions, and a cooking area. It's better than that cellar, she said, setting down her shotgun. While Eli tended to the horses in the small lean-to-shelter behind the cabin, Josephine got a fire going in the fireplace. The familiar tasks of survival temporarily pushed aside the reality of their situation, that they were fugitives, that men with guns were hunting them, that their futures were uncertain at best. When Eli returned, he found Josephine had prepared a simple meal from Clayton's store's beans, jerky, and coffee that smelled better than anything he'd had in weeks. You didn't have to cook, he said, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. I don't mind. Feels normal, somehow. She handed him a tin plate. Your wound needs changing. After they ate, she insisted on examining his shoulder. The bullet graze was angry and red, but showed no signs of serious infection. As she cleaned it with water heated over the fire, Eli found himself studying her face in the flickering light. Why didn't you turn me in? He asked suddenly. $5,000 would have set you up somewhere new, far from Walsh. Her hands stilled on his shoulder. Because I know what it's like to be hunted for standing your ground. She resumed her work, wrapping a clean strip of cloth around his arm. Besides, those men would have killed you before you ever saw a trial. You don't know what I did. No, she agreed, securing the bandage. But I know what desperation looks like. Whatever you did, I doubt you did it without reason. Eli was silent for a long moment, the weight of his past pressing down on him. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. They killed my brother. Railroad men. Thomas was 16, working our small claim outside Wickenburg. The railroad wanted the land. When he refused to sell, they beat him and left him for dead. Eli's hands clenched into fists. I found him 3 days later. He'd crawled nearly a mile trying to get help before he died. Josephine's eyes filled with sympathy. I'm sorry, Eli. I tracked down every man involved. The 3 I caught paid with their lives. His gaze was hard when it met hers. I'd do it again. And the others? 2 more out there. One's a company man named Frederick Garrison. The other's his hired gun, Victor Reeves. Eli's voice was cold. I'll find them eventually. Josephine was quiet for a moment. Revenge won't bring your brother back. No, he agreed. But it might bring justice. At the cost of your own life? She challenged. You'll never stop running. What else is there for me now? He asked bitterly. She had no answer for that. They sat in silence as the fire burned lower, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Josephine rose and moved to the bed. You take it, Eli said quickly. I'll sleep by the fire. She nodded, too tired to argue. As she settled under the worn blanket, she watched Eli staring into the flames, his profile sharp in the dying light. Eli, she said softly, thank you for bringing me here. He looked over, his expression softening. Get some rest, Josephine. Tomorrow will come soon enough. As she drifted off to sleep, Josephine wondered what tomorrow would bring for both of them, 2 wounded souls thrown together by circumstance, each running from a past that refused to release its grip. The morning dawned clear and cool, sunlight filtering through the cabin's single window. Josephine woke to find Eli already up, tending to the horses outside. She stretched, muscles aching from days of hard riding, and set about rekindling the fire. They fell into an easy routine over the next few days. Eli hunted and checked for signs of pursuit, while Josephine maintained their shelter and prepared meals. They spoke little of their pasts, instead focusing on the immediate concerns of survival. Yet in the quiet moments, something was growing between them, a tentative trust born of shared danger. On the 4th evening, as they sat outside watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and crimson, Eli finally asked the question that had been on his mind. What will you do, Josephine, if we manage to shake these men off our trail? She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. I had planned to go to California, San Francisco perhaps, a big city where I could disappear, maybe find work as a teacher again. She glanced at him. And you? Will you continue hunting these railroad men? Eli was silent for a long moment. I don't know any more, he admitted. For months, revenge was all I thought about. All that kept me going. He looked down at his hands. But it's a lonely path. Yes, she agreed softly. It is. Their eyes met, and something shifted between them, a recognition that despite their different journeys, they understood each other in ways few others could. The moment was broken by the distant sound of hoofbeats. Eli was on his feet instantly, hand on his gun. "Get inside," he ordered, scanning the valley below. "Could be nothing, but we can't take chances." They retreated to the cabin, Eli positioning himself by the window while Josephine loaded her shotgun. The minutes stretched endlessly as the hoofbeats grew louder, then stopped. A man's voice called out, "Hello, the cabin. Clayton, you old coot. You in there?" Eli tensed, then relaxed slightly. "It's Samuel Parker. He trades with Clayton sometimes. Is he trustworthy?" "As much as anyone." Eli kept his gun ready nonetheless. "Stay inside." He stepped out, keeping the cabin at his back. "Clayton's not here, Parker." The trader, a heavy-set man with a gray beard, squinted up at him. "Xander? That you?" His eyes widened in recognition. "Well, I'll be damned. You're a brave man showing your face. Every lawman and bounty hunter from here to New Mexico's looking for you." "Just passing through," Eli replied carefully. "What brings you up this way?" Parker dismounted, leading his packhorse. "Trading run to the mining camps up north. Thought I'd check if Clayton needed anything." He studied Eli. "You alone up here?" Before Eli could answer, Josephine appeared in the doorway, shotgun lowered but ready. Parker gave a low whistle. "I see you ain't alone after all." "Howdy, madam." "Mr. Parker," she acknowledged with a nod. "You two picked a hell of a hiding spot." Parker removed his hat, wiping sweat from his brow. "Especially with those posses combing the territory." Eli's posture stiffened. "What posses?" "Two different groups by my count. One's official marshals out of Prescott. The other's private men. Mean-looking bunch led by a feller named Reeves." Eli and Josephine exchanged a look. Victor Reeves, one of the men responsible for Thomas's death. "How close?" Eli demanded. "The marshals were in Payson 3 days ago. Reeves and his boys are moving faster, asking questions in every settlement between here and Flagstaff." Parker shook his head. "They're offering extra for information. Seems they're looking for a woman too." Josephine's knuckles whitened around her shotgun. "You planning to collect that reward, Parker?" Eli's voice was dangerously quiet. The trader looked offended. "Now, Xander, have I ever struck you as a man who'd sell out a friend?" He spat on the ground. "Railroad men are vultures. I ain't forgotten what they did to your brother." Some of the tension left Eli's shoulders. "Appreciate that." "Don't appreciate it yet." Parker began unloading supplies from his packhorse. "I brought coffee, ammunition, and news. You two can't stay here. Reeves has men watching the mountain passes. It's only a matter of time before they check this cabin." "Where can we go?" Josephine asked, stepping forward. Parker considered for a moment. "There's an old Apache trading route through the mountains. Leads south toward the Salt River. Few white men know it exists." He pulled a crude map from his saddlebag. "I can mark it for you. It ain't an easy trail, but it'll get you to safer country." As Parker spread the map on a flat rock, explaining the route, Eli felt a growing sense of urgency. Their brief respite was over. Once again, they would need to run. That night, after Parker had continued on his way with promises of discretion, Eli and Josephine prepared for departure at first light. The peaceful routine they'd established was shattered, replaced by the tense efficiency of people accustomed to flight. "We should split up," Eli said as they sorted through supplies. "You'd have a better chance alone. I'm the one they want most." Josephine looked up sharply. "No. Josephine, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable. Together we have 2 guns, 2 sets of eyes. Alone we're more vulnerable." She crossed to him, placing a hand on his arm. Besides, Reeves is looking for both of us now. Eli wanted to argue, but the truth in her words stopped him. More than that, he realized with a jolt of clarity, he didn't want to part from her. Somehow, in these few days, Josephine Harlow had become important to him. "All right," he conceded. "Together, then. But if things go bad, they won't," she interrupted, her confidence steadying him. "We'll follow Parker's route. Get beyond their reach." Eli nodded, though both knew such optimism was fragile. They finished their preparations in companionable silence, each drawing strength from the other's presence. Later, as Josephine slept in the bed for what would be the final time, Eli wrote a note to Clayton, explaining their presence and promising to repay him for the supplies they'd used. It was a small gesture in a world that no longer made room for such niceties, but it mattered to him. He had just sealed the note when Josephine stirred. "Can't sleep?" she asked, sitting up. "Just finishing up here." He placed the note on the table. She studied him in the low light. "Come sit with me, please." Eli hesitated, then joined her on the edge of the bed. For a moment, neither spoke. "I was thinking about what you said earlier." Josephine finally broke the silence. "About revenge being a lonely path." "It is," he confirmed. "And what about redemption? Is that a path that can be walked together?" The question caught him off guard. "Redemption? I'm not sure that's possible for me anymore." "I think it is." Her hand found his in the darkness. "For both of us." The simple touch sent warmth through him. How long had it been since he'd allowed himself to feel anything beyond anger and grief? Since he'd let anyone close? "Josephine," he began, uncertain what he wanted to say. She leaned forward, her free hand touching his face gently. "We may not have much time left. Tomorrow, the next day, who knows what will happen." Her eyes held his. "But right now we're here. Together." The kiss that followed was tentative at first, then deepened with a hunger that surprised them both. Eli pulled her closer, his hands tangling in her copper hair as years of loneliness dissolved in her embrace. When they finally broke apart, breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "We hardly know each other," he whispered. Josephine smiled. "I know enough. I know you have honor despite what the wanted posters say. I know you protect what matters to you." Her fingers traced the line of his jaw. "And I know that when I'm with you, I feel less afraid." Her honesty humbled him. In that moment, Eli realized that his path had irrevocably changed. Whatever happened tomorrow, he was no longer merely seeking vengeance, he was fighting for a future. A future that, somehow, had come to include this remarkable woman. As the night deepened around the cabin, they found comfort in each other's arms, two wounded souls finding unexpected healing in the midst of danger. Dawn would bring new perils, but for now, they had found a moment of peace in a world determined to deny it to them. They departed before sunrise, leaving the cabin as they'd found it, save for Eli's note and a small stack of coins, what little money they could spare as payment for Clayton's hospitality. The mountain air was sharp with the scent of pine as they followed Parker's map along a nearly invisible trail that wound higher into the Mazatzals. The route was treacherous, barely wide enough for the horses in places, with steep drops to one side and sheer rock face to the other. Josephine, despite her city upbringing, handled the terrain with remarkable composure, never complaining even when they had to dismount and lead the horses over particularly dangerous stretches. By midday, they had reached a high pass that offered a view of the valley they'd left behind. In the distance, rising dust indicated riders approaching the area of Clayton's cabin. "Reeves," Eli said grimly. "We left just in time." They pushed on, descending into a narrow canyon where a small stream provided water for themselves and their mounts. The Apache Trail, marked by subtle signs that Parker had taught Eli to recognize, continued southward, occasionally disappearing altogether before reappearing around a bend or over a rise. As dusk approached, they found themselves in a small meadow sheltered by towering pines. Exhausted from the day's difficult travel, they made camp, keeping the fire small and smokeless. "How much farther to the Salt River?" Josephine asked, massaging her sore legs. Eli consulted Parker's map. 2 days, maybe 3 at this pace. Once we cross it, we'll be in Apache territory. Is that safer? For us? Possibly. The army won't follow us there, and Reeves might think twice. Eli folded the map carefully. But the Apache have their own reasons to distrust white folks. We'll need to be careful. Josephine nodded, her expression thoughtful. What then? Once we're across? It was the question Eli had been avoiding. Their immediate goal was escape, but beyond that, their paths remained unclear. The night they'd shared had changed something between them, created a connection neither had anticipated. But was it enough to build a future on? "There's a settlement near Tucson," he said slowly. "People there mind their own business. We could rest, figure out our next move. Together." The word held a question he couldn't ignore. Eli met her eyes across the small fire. "If that's what you want." "Is it what you want, Eli?" Her voice was steady, but he could see the vulnerability in her gaze. He moved to sit beside her, taking her hand in his. "A week ago, I didn't think I wanted anything beyond settling scores. Now," he struggled to find the words, "now I find myself thinking about what comes after. And when I do, you're there in those thoughts." Her smile was like sunrise after a long night. She leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. "Then we go to Tucson. Together." They sat like that for a long while, the fire crackling softly as stars appeared overhead. The dangers were still real. Reeves and his men, the marshals, the unforgiving terrain, even the Apache whose land they traversed, but for the first time in months, Eli felt something like hope. That night, they slept close, wrapped in shared blankets against the mountain chill. Eli woke once, startled by a noise, only to find it was a deer moving through the undergrowth nearby. As he settled back down, Josephine stirred against him. "Everything all right?" she murmured sleepily. "Yes," he whispered, pulling her closer. "Everything's fine. Go back to sleep." As he drifted off again, Eli realized with surprise that he meant it. Despite everything, in this moment, with her beside him, things were indeed fine. The next morning brought thick fog that blanketed the mountains, limiting visibility to a few yards. While it provided cover from searching eyes, it also made navigation treacherous. They moved carefully, relying more on instinct than sight as they continued along the Apache Trail. By noon, the fog had begun to lift, revealing a landscape that dropped away steeply to the south. They paused at an outcropping to get their bearings. "There," Eli pointed. "You can just make out the Salt River in the distance. We're making good time." As they prepared to continue, the sound of a twig snapping froze them both. Eli drew his revolver, pushing Josephine behind him as he scanned the clearing. "Wouldn't do that if I were you, Cowboy," came a calm voice from the trees. "You're surrounded." 5 Apache warriors emerged from the forest, rifles and bows trained on them. Their leader, a tall man with streaks of gray in his long hair, stepped forward. "You travel our paths uninvited," he said in accented but clear English. Eli slowly holstered his gun, raising his hands. "We mean no disrespect. We're just passing through. White men always say they are just passing through. Then more come, and soon our land is not our own." The leader's eyes narrowed. "Why are you here?" Josephine stepped forward, despite Eli's attempt to keep her back. "We're running from men who want to kill us. We were told this trail would lead us to safety." The Apache studied her, then Eli. "You are the ones the soldiers seek." The man with the price on his head, and the woman who defied the cattle chief. Eli tensed. How do you know about that? We watch. We listen. We know what happens beyond our mountains. The leader gestured to his men, who lowered their weapons slightly. I am Nahilze of the Tonto Apache. Why should I not deliver you to those who hunt you? The reward would buy much for my people. It was a fair question. Eli searched for an answer that might satisfy the warrior. Because the men who hunt us are the same men who steal Apache land, he said carefully. The same men who break treaties and drive your people from their homes. Nahilze considered this. And you fight against these men? The railroad killed my brother when he refused to sell our land, Eli explained. I sought justice when the law would not provide it. Ah! Understanding flickered in Nahilze's eyes. Vengeance. This I understand. He turned his attention to Josephine. And you, woman? What is your crime? I refuse to marry a man who thinks he owns everything and everyone around him. When he tried to force me, I shot him. Her voice was steady. I would do it again. To their surprise, Nahilze laughed. You have the spirit of an Apache woman. He exchanged words with his companions in their native tongue, then turned back to Eli and Josephine. We will not harm you, but the trail ahead is watched. Your enemies have set men at the river crossing. Eli's heart sank. Is there another way? There is always another way for those who know the land. Nahilze pointed west. 2 of my men will guide you to a place where the river runs shallow. From there, you must find your own path. It was an unexpected kindness. Thank you, Eli said sincerely. We won't forget this. Nahilze's expression grew serious. Remember this. Then, not all enemies are what they seem, and not all friends wear the same face as you. With that cryptic statement, he signaled to 2 younger warriors, who stepped forward. Taza and Eskaminzin will take you to the crossing. After that, you are in the hands of your own spirits. The Apache guides led them on a winding path that no white man could have followed, through narrow canyons and across rocky plateaus where no trail was visible to Eli's eyes. They traveled in silence, moving swiftly despite the difficult terrain. By late afternoon, they reached a secluded bend in the Salt River where the water flowed shallow over a bed of smooth stones. The Apache warriors pointed across, indicating a barely visible path on the far bank. Follow until sunset, Taza instructed. Then look for 3 tall rocks standing together. Turn east there. It will take you away from the men who watch the main trails. Your enemies are persistent, Eskaminzin added. The one with the scar on his face offers gold for news of you. Eli felt his blood run cold. Victor Reeves. Did you see another man with him? Well-dressed. Speaks like an Easterner. The warriors exchanged a glance. Yes. He gives the orders, though he lets the scarred one speak. Frederick Garrison, the railroad executive who had ordered Thomas's death. Both of the remaining men responsible for his brother's murder were now hunting him. The coincidence seemed too great. They know we're in these mountains, Eli realized aloud. Yes, Taza confirmed. They follow your trail like hungry wolves. After the Apache departed, Eli and Josephine carefully forded the river, the water reaching only to their horses' knees at its deepest point. On the southern bank, they paused to rest and dry their feet before continuing along the path their guides had indicated. Reeves and Garrison, Eli said grimly as they rode. It can't be a coincidence that they're both here. They must have joined forces with Walsh's men, Josephine reasoned. Our separate troubles have become one. Eli nodded, his mind racing. The situation had grown more dangerous, but it also presented an opportunity. For months he had hunted these men without success, and now they were hunting him, bringing themselves within his reach. You're thinking about confronting them, Josephine said, reading his expression. Eli, that's suicide. They have too many men. I might never get another chance, he argued. They're both here in the open. And if you die? What justice is there in that? Her voice sharpened. What about everything we talked about, Tucson? A future redemption? Her words cut through his vengeful thoughts. She was right, of course. Charging headlong at Reeves and Garrison would likely end with him dead and possibly Josephine as well. You're right, he conceded. We keep moving. Get to safety first. The relief in her eyes made him glad he'd agreed, even as part of him still burned to confront his brother's killers. They continued until they spotted the 3 tall rocks Taza had described, turning east as instructed. The new path led them into increasingly rough country, a maze of slot canyons and dry washes that would provide excellent cover but slow their progress considerably. As the sun began to set, they made camp in a sheltered depression, keeping their fire tiny and well hidden. We should reach more open country by tomorrow afternoon, Eli said, studying Parker's map alongside what he'd learned from the Apache. From there, it's maybe 4 days to Tucson if we push hard. Josephine nodded, her face drawn with fatigue. The days of hard travel were taking their toll on both of them. She leaned against him as they shared a meager dinner of jerky and hardtack. Tell me about your brother, she said softly. Not how he died, who he was. The request caught Eli off guard, but he found himself wanting to share these memories with her. Thomas was bright, always reading, always full of ideas. He wanted to study law someday. A smile touched his lips. He was better than me in every way that mattered. Kinder, more thoughtful. He sounds wonderful. He was. After our parents died, he was all the family I had left. Eli stared into the small flame. When I found him, he'd written my name in the dirt beside him. He'd been trying to reach me, to say goodbye. Josephine's hand covered his. I'm so sorry, Eli. What about you? Any family left? She shook her head. Just my father, and he's gone now. My mother died when I was very young. A wistful expression crossed her face. I always dreamed of having a family of my own someday. A home filled with children's laughter. Before Walsh, I thought perhaps I might still find that. You still could, Eli said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. Perhaps we both could. The moment was interrupted by the distant sound of a gunshot, echoing through the canyons. They tensed, listening. Another shot followed, then several more in quick succession. Too far to be aimed at us, Eli said quietly, but too close for comfort. They extinguished their fire immediately, sitting in darkness as they strained to hear any approaching danger. No more shots came, but the damage to their sense of security was done. We should move on at first light, Josephine whispered. I don't like how close they're getting. Eli nodded, though she couldn't see him in the darkness. I'll take first watch. Try to get some sleep. They passed a restless night, taking turns keeping guard. The distant sounds of men moving through the wilderness reached them, occasionally shouts, the nickering of horses, even the bark of a tracking dog. Their pursuers were casting a wide net, determined to find them. Dawn brought new challenges as they navigated the complex terrain, constantly alert for signs of pursuit. By midday, the landscape began to open up, the canyons giving way to rolling hills covered in mesquite and cactus. More exposed here, Eli noted with concern. We'll need to be careful. They moved from cover to cover, using every fold in the land to conceal their progress. The sun beat down mercilessly as the day wore on, sapping their strength. Their water was running low, and both horses were showing signs of fatigue. Late in the afternoon, they spotted dust on the horizon behind them. Riders, Josephine said, her voice tight with anxiety. At least 4 or 5, moving fast. Eli surveyed their surroundings desperately. There was precious little cover in the immediate vicinity, just scattered mesquite and the dry bed of a seasonal wash about a quarter-mile ahead. The wash, he decided. It's our best chance. If we can get there before they spot us, we might be able to follow it south and lose them. They spurred their tired horses forward, abandoning caution for speed. The wash loomed closer, a jagged cut in the earth that promised temporary shelter. They were less than 100 yards away when a shout went up behind them. There they are! The crack of a rifle followed immediately, the bullet kicking up dirt beside Josephine's horse. The bay mare shied violently, nearly unseating her. Eli reached over, steadying her as they pushed their mounts to a desperate gallop. They crashed down into the wash, the horses sliding on the steep banks. Once in the streambed, they turned south, riding hard along its winding course. More shots rang out, but the high banks now protected them from direct fire. "Keep going," Eli shouted. "Don't slow down." They rode recklessly, letting the horses pick their way through the rocky streambed as best they could. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew louder as their hunters reached the wash and followed. A bend in the wash revealed a narrow side canyon. Without hesitation, Eli led them into it, hoping to lose their pursuers in the maze-like terrain. The canyon narrowed quickly, forcing them to slow their pace. "I think we're gaining some distance," Josephine said breathlessly as they rounded another bend. But the words had barely left her mouth when the canyon ended abruptly in a sheer rock wall. They were trapped. "Dismount," Eli ordered, scanning the rocky slopes on either side. "We'll have to go on foot from here." They tied the exhausted horses to a scraggly mesquite and began to climb the steep eastern wall of the canyon. The going was treacherous, loose rocks sliding beneath their boots, sharp stones cutting their hands as they scrambled upward. They had nearly reached the top when the first of their pursuers appeared at the mouth of the canyon. A shout went up, followed by the thunder of a shotgun blast that kicked up stone fragments near Eli's head. "Keep climbing," he yelled to Josephine, drawing his revolver and firing back to slow their attackers. Josephine reached the top first, turning to help pull Eli up the final few feet. As they crested the ridge, they found themselves looking down on rolling hills that stretched toward distant mountains. "There!" Josephine pointed to a thick stand of trees about half a mile away. "We can lose them there." They ran, stumbling over the uneven ground, as men appeared on the ridge behind them. Bullets whistled past, but the distance made accuracy difficult. The trees grew closer, promising shelter if they could just reach them. Eli's wounded shoulder burned with each stride, the exertion reopening the barely healed injury. He could feel warm blood soaking through his shirt, but there was no time to stop. Josephine ran beside him, her face set with determination despite the fear in her eyes. They were almost to the trees when Eli heard Josephine cry out. He turned to see her stumble, clutching her side. A red stain was spreading across her blouse. "Josie!" He caught her before she fell, supporting her weight. "How bad?" "Just grazed me," she gasped, though her pale face suggested otherwise. "Keep going." Eli lifted her into his arms despite her protests and the searing pain in his own shoulder. With the last of his strength, he carried her into the shelter of the trees, pushing through the undergrowth until he found a small clearing hidden from view. Gently, he set her down, examining the wound with shaking hands. The bullet had indeed grazed her side, tearing through flesh but missing vital organs. Still, she was losing blood. "I need to stop the bleeding," he said, tearing strips from his shirt to create a bandage. Josephine winced as he applied pressure to the wound. "How close are they?" "Too close," he admitted, hearing shouts from the direction they'd come. "But they'll have to search these woods. It buys us some time." He finished bandaging her side as best he could, then helped her to her feet. Can you walk? She nodded grimly. I have to, don't I? They moved deeper into the woods, each step an effort as exhaustion and pain threatened to overwhelm them. The sounds of pursuit ebbed and flowed as their hunters spread out to search the area. As darkness began to fall, they reached a small stream cutting through the forest. Eli helped Josephine to its edge, where she drank gratefully while he refilled their water skins. We've lost the horses, she said between sips, and most of our supplies. We'll manage, he assured her, though he wasn't certain how. They were still days from Tucson, on foot in rough country, with armed men hunting them. The situation was growing desperate. You should go on without me, Eli, Josephine said suddenly. I'm slowing you down. He looked at her sharply. That's not happening. We stay together. Be realistic. With this wound, I can't move fast enough. They'll catch us both. Then they catch us both, he said firmly. I'm not leaving you behind, Josie. Not now, not ever. The vehemence in his voice surprised them both. In the gathering dusk, their eyes held for a long moment. Why? She whispered. Eli took her hand, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. Because somewhere between that barn in Seligman and here, I fell in love with you, he said simply. And I'm not ready to let that go. Despite the pain and fear, a smile bloomed on Josephine's face. I love you too, she said softly. God help me, but I do. He leaned forward, kissing her gently. When they separated, a new resolve had settled over them both. We'll find a way, Eli promised. Together. As night fell completely, they moved along the stream, hoping it would lead them out of the forest and toward civilization. The darkness was both ally and enemy, hiding them from their pursuers but making progress painfully slow and treacherous. Hours passed as they pushed onward, stopping frequently to rest Josephine's wounded side. Eli's shoulder throbbed with each step, but he refused to complain. Compared to what she was enduring, his pain seemed trivial. Near midnight, the trees began to thin, and they found themselves approaching the edge of the forest. In the distance, a pinprick of light caught Eli's attention. A cabin, he whispered, or a ranch house. Josephine leaned heavily against him. Could be friends of Reeves or Walsh. Could be, he agreed. Or it could be our only chance. You need real medical attention, not just my field dressing. The light represented both hope and danger, potential sanctuary or a trap. They had little choice but to approach it cautiously. It took nearly an hour to cross the open ground between the forest and the light, moving slowly and stopping often to listen for pursuit. As they drew closer, the light resolved into a small ranch house with a barn and corral. A single lantern burned in a window, its glow a beacon in the darkness. Looks quiet, Eli observed. One horse in the corral, probably just a homesteader. They approached the door, both too exhausted and hurt to manage much stealth. Eli raised his hand to knock, then hesitated. If anything happens, he told Josephine, run. Don't wait for me. She shook her head stubbornly. We stay together. Remember. With a resigned nod, Eli knocked firmly on the door. For several long moments, there was no response. Then came the sound of footsteps, and the door creaked open to reveal an elderly woman holding a shotgun with unwavering steadiness. Who's there? She demanded. Madam, we need help, Eli said, keeping his hands visible. My wife is injured. The woman raised her lantern, illuminating their battered, blood-stained figures. Her weathered face showed surprise, then concern. Lord above, you two look half dead. She lowered the shotgun slightly. What happened? We were attacked by bandits, Josephine improvised weakly. They took our horses and shot at us when we tried to get away. The woman studied them for a long moment, her shrewd eyes taking in every detail. Finally, she stepped back. Come in, then. I'm Martha Jenkins. My husband's been dead these 10 years, so it's just me here. She set the shotgun aside but kept it within reach. Let's see to that wound. Relief washed over Eli as they entered the simple but clean home. Martha directed them to a table where she could examine Josephine's injury in better light. Not too deep, but needs proper cleaning, she declared after removing the makeshift bandage. You're lucky another inch and it would have been your liver. She glanced at Eli. Your shoulder needs attention too. Sit down before you fall down, young man. For the next hour, Martha worked efficiently, cleaning and bandaging their wounds with the skill of someone long accustomed to frontier medicine. She fed them a simple meal of beans and cornbread, which they devoured gratefully, and offered them her spare room for the night. Bandits, you say? She remarked as she poured them coffee. Funny thing, a group of men stopped by earlier today asking if I'd seen a man and woman traveling together. Said they were dangerous fugitives. Eli tensed, his hand instinctively moving toward his gun. Martha noticed the movement and smiled thinly. I told them I hadn't seen anyone in weeks. Not fond of men who ride in groups, asking questions while fingering their weapons. She sipped her coffee calmly. I don't know what trouble you two are really in, and I don't need to know. But you'll be safe here tonight. Thank you, Josephine said sincerely. We won't forget your kindness. No need for thanks. Just pass it on someday. Martha stood, collecting their empty plates. Now get some rest. You both look like you need it. In the small bedroom, Eli and Josephine collapsed onto the narrow bed, too exhausted to do more than hold each other close. Do you think she suspects who we are? Josephine whispered. Probably, Eli replied. But she made her choice to help us anyway. There are still good people in the world, she murmured, her voice fading as sleep began to claim her. Like you. Eli kissed her forehead gently. And you, Josie. And you. They slept deeply, secure for the first time in days. Morning came with the scent of coffee and bacon, rousing them from much-needed rest. Josephine's wound looked better after proper cleaning and bandaging, and Eli found he could move his shoulder with less pain. Martha had already been up for hours, feeding her livestock and preparing breakfast. As they ate, she laid out a map on the table. Tucson's still a good 3 days' ride from here, she said, tracing the route with a gnarled finger. But there's a small settlement called Pine Creek about a day south. A friend of mine, Dr. Wilson, lives there. He can look after those wounds properly. We don't have horses, Eli reminded her. Martha smiled. I've got two. Old Bess isn't much to look at, but she's steady. And Trapper's got some years on him, but he'll get you there. She held up a hand as Eli began to protest. I rarely ride anymore, and they need the exercise. You can send them back with the mail carrier once you reach Pine Creek. The generosity overwhelmed them both. We can't take your horses, Josephine objected. You can and you will, Martha said firmly. Those men are still searching the area. On foot, you won't make it. She was right, and they knew it. With reluctance, they accepted her offer, along with provisions for the journey. One more thing, Martha said as they prepared to leave. Those men who came by, one of them had a scar down his cheek. Mean eyes. The other was dressed too fine for these parts. Talked like he was better than everybody. Reeves and Garrison, Eli confirmed grimly. Martha nodded. They had about 10 men with them. Said they were heading to Pine Creek next, then continuing south. She fixed Eli with a stern look. Whatever you've got against those men, and I suspect it's plenty, think hard before you go looking for trouble. That woman there loves you something fierce. I can see it in how she looks at you. Don't make her a widow before she's properly a wife. Eli glanced at Josephine, who was checking the saddle on the horse Martha had called Bess. I won't, he promised. We just want to get away, start fresh. Good. Martha patted his arm. Now go on. Stay off the main trails, and you should reach Pine Creek by nightfall tomorrow. They thanked her again and mounted up, heading south as she had directed. The horses, while old, were indeed steady and seemed glad for the exercise. Josephine rode well despite her injury, and they made good progress throughout the day. As evening approached, they made camp in a sheltered arroyo, building a small fire for warmth. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. What Martha said, Josephine began as they sat close to the fire. About me not being properly a wife. Eli looked up, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. She assumed because I introduced you that way. I hope you don't mind. I don't. Josephine's eyes held his. But it made me think. About what happens if we make it to Tucson. If we truly find safety. She took a deep breath. Would you want that? To make it real? Eli's heart seemed to stop, then race ahead. Are you asking what I think you're asking, Josie? She smiled, a hint of mischief in her eyes despite their circumstances. I believe traditionally you'd be the one doing the asking, Eli Xander. He took her hands in his. Nothing about us has been traditional. His voice grew serious. But yes, I want that. More than I've wanted anything in a long time. Then ask me, she said softly. Eli shifted to kneel before her, still holding her hands. The firelight cast a golden glow over them both as he searched for the right words. Josephine Harlow, I never expected to find love while running for my life. But you've shown me there's more to living than just surviving. His voice wavered slightly. I don't have much to offer, just my heart and my promise to spend every day trying to be worthy of you. Will you marry me? Tears glistened in her eyes. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will. Their kiss was a promise, a commitment deeper than any words could express. When they finally parted, both were smiling despite the danger that still surrounded them. When we reach Pine Creek, Eli said, we'll find that Dr. Martha mentioned and a preacher too, if you're willing. I'm willing, Josephine confirmed. More than willing. That night, they slept in each other's arms, the future suddenly holding more promise than peril. Morning found them renewed, their resolve strengthened by the commitment they'd made to each other. They reached Pine Creek by mid-afternoon the following day. It was a small settlement, little more than a general store, a saloon, a few houses, and a church with a doctor's office attached. They approached cautiously, alert for any sign of Reeves and his men. Looks quiet, Eli observed as they rode slowly down the main street. Let's find Dr. Wilson first. The doctor's office was easy to locate, attached to the white-clapboard church at the end of the street. They tied their horses to the hitching post and Eli helped Josephine dismount, mindful of her wound. Dr. Wilson proved to be a middle-aged man with kind eyes and steady hands. He examined their injuries thoroughly, applying fresh bandages and providing salve for the healing wounds. Martha Jenkins sent you, did she? He asked as he worked. Good woman, Martha. Saved my life once during a blizzard. She saved ours too, Josephine said with a smile. When the doctor finished, Eli broached the subject of their other intention. Is the preacher available? We'd like to get married. Dr. Wilson raised an eyebrow, but his expression was warm. Pastor Miller should be back from his rounds by now. I'll fetch him for you. Within the hour, they stood before the simple altar in the small church. Pastor Miller, a jovial man with a shock of white hair, performed the ceremony with genuine warmth. Dr. Wilson and his wife served as witnesses. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, and when Eli kissed his bride, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders, as if this commitment somehow made their future more certain. Mrs. Xander, he whispered against her lips. Josephine's smile was radiant. I like the sound of that. They spent the night in a room above the general store, the proprietor having offered it when he learned they were newlyweds. It was simple but clean, and for one night, they allowed themselves to forget the danger and simply be husband and wife. Morning brought them back to reality. As they prepared to continue their journey to Tucson, Eli noticed increased activity in the small town. Men he didn't recognize were arriving, asking questions at the saloon. His instincts prickled with warning. "We need to leave," he told Josephine as he returned to their room. "Now." They slipped out the back way, retrieving their horses from the stable. As they mounted up, a shout went up from the street. "There! That's them!" Eli saw Victor Reeves standing in the middle of the street, pointing directly at them. Behind him, Frederick Garrison emerged from the saloon, flanked by several armed men. "Ride!" Eli urged, and they spurred their horses down the alley behind the buildings. Shots rang out as they reached the edge of town, bullets whizzing past them. They galloped south, pushing their aging mounts as hard as they dared. The sound of pursuit grew behind them. "They're gaining," Josephine called as they thundered across an open stretch of land. Eli scanned the terrain desperately. Ahead, a line of hills offered potential cover, but they'd never reach it before their pursuers caught up. They needed a diversion. A small ranch appeared on their right, a modest house with a large barn and several corrals filled with cattle. Eli made a split-second decision. "This way!" he shouted, veering toward the ranch. They rode directly toward the cattle pens, startling the animals as they approached. Eli dismounted quickly, throwing open the gates to the largest corral. "What are you doing?" Josephine asked, still on horseback. "Creating chaos," he replied, firing his revolver into the air. The cattle, already agitated, stampeded through the open gate. Eli remounted swiftly, and they positioned themselves behind the fleeing animals, driving them directly toward their pursuers. The strategy worked perfectly. Reeves and his men found themselves facing a wall of panicked cattle bearing down on them. They scattered, some nearly unseated as they tried to avoid the stampede. In the confusion, Eli and Josephine broke away, heading for the hills to the southeast. By the time Reeves and Garrison regrouped, their quarry had a substantial lead. "That was brilliant," Josephine said as they slowed their horses to a more sustainable pace. "Let's hope it bought us enough time," Eli replied, glancing behind them. "We still have a long way to Tucson." They rode through the remainder of the day, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and tend to their own needs. By nightfall, they had reached rougher terrain that offered more places to hide. "We should rest," Josephine suggested, noting how Eli winced each time his horse stumbled on the uneven ground. "Just for a few hours." They found a sheltered spot between two large boulders and made a cold camp, not risking a fire that might be spotted. As they shared the last of their provisions, Eli laid out their situation. "We're about 2 days from Tucson at this pace. The horses are tiring, and so are we. And Reeves and Garrison? Still coming, I'd wager. They've invested too much to give up now." Eli's expression was grim. "This ends in Tucson, one way or another." Josephine took his hand. "We could keep running. Head to California as I originally planned. Or north to Colorado." Eli considered her suggestion. It was tempting to simply keep running, to put as much distance as possible between themselves and their pursuers. But the reality was stark. "They'd find us eventually," he said softly. "Men like that don't forget. And I'm tired of running, Josie." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that in Tucson we make our stand. We find a way to end this legally if possible." Josephine's brow furrowed. "How?" "I've been thinking about that. Garrison is a prominent man, but he's not above the law. If we could find evidence of what he ordered done to Thomas, bring it to the right authorities." Eli's eyes gleamed with purpose. And Walsh may have power in Flagstaff, but his influence doesn't extend to Tucson. If we can prove he's pursuing you with false accusations. It was a slim hope, but it was something. Josephine nodded slowly. It's worth trying. Better than always looking over our shoulders. They rested in shifts that night, too wary to both sleep at once. Dawn found them back in the saddle, continuing their journey south. The terrain gradually flattened, desert giving way to sparse grassland as they approached the Santa Cruz Valley. By nightfall of the second day, they could see the lights of Tucson in the distance, a constellation of promise after days of desperate flight. They approached cautiously, unsure of what awaited them in the frontier town. Tucson in 1878 was a growing settlement, benefiting from both the stagecoach line and the recent arrival of the Southern Pacific Railroad. Its streets were a mix of adobe buildings and newer wooden structures, with a diverse population of Mexicans, Americans, and native peoples. They entered town after dark, seeking lodging at a small hotel on the outskirts. The clerk asked few questions, merely noting their trail-worn appearance with a practiced indifference. In their room, they collapsed onto the bed, exhaustion finally overtaking them. "We made it," Josephine murmured sleepily. "I almost can't believe it." Eli pulled her close, inhaling the scent of her hair. "Get some rest, Mrs. Xander. Tomorrow we figure out how to stay here." Morning brought renewed determination. After a proper meal, their first in days, they set about establishing themselves in Tucson. Their first stop was the office of the town marshal, a grizzled man named Isaiah Cooper. "Marshal Cooper," Eli began. "My name is Eli Xander. This is my wife, Josephine. We need your help." The marshal leaned back in his chair, studying them both. "Xander, that name's familiar." Recognition dawned in his eyes. "There are wanted posters with that name. Something about railroad men killed up north." "Yes," Eli admitted. "But there's more to the story than those posters say." For the next hour, Eli and Josephine laid out everything: Thomas's murder, Eli's vengeance, Walsh's pursuit of Josephine, and the current threat posed by Reeves and Garrison. The marshal listened without interruption, his weathered face revealing nothing. When they finished, he was silent for a long moment. "That's quite a tale," he finally said. "Got any proof of any of it?" "Not with us," Eli conceded. "But there are witnesses to what happened to my brother. And for Josephine, there are people in Flagstaff who know Walsh's reputation, how he threatens women who refuse him." Marshal Cooper rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Normally, I'd be obliged to arrest you on the spot, Xander. Those killings you admitted to are serious business." "I understand," Eli said, tension evident in every line of his body. "However," the marshal continued, "I've had some dealings with the railroad myself, seen how they operate when they want land." He leaned forward. "And I've heard stories about Edgar Walsh, none of them flattering." Hope flickered in Josephine's eyes. "Does that mean you'll help us?" "It means I'll look into your claims before I make any decisions." Marshal Cooper stood, pacing to the window. "These men following you, Reeves and Garrison, when do you expect them to reach Tucson?" "A day behind us, maybe less," Eli estimated. "They're determined. Then we don't have much time." The marshal returned to his desk, pulling out paper and pen. "I want sworn statements from both of you, everything you've told me in writing. Then I'll telegraph some contacts up north. See if your stories check out." It wasn't the immediate help they'd hoped for, but it was better than arrest. They spent the next hour writing their statements, every detail they could remember that might help their case. "Now," Marshal Cooper said when they finished, "find yourselves somewhere to lay low. I'll send word when I know more." They left the marshal's office with mixed emotions: relief that he was willing to investigate, fear that it might not be enough. "What now?" Josephine asked as they walked the bustling streets of Tucson. We find work, Eli decided. Legitimate work. Show we're not just running criminals. It took the remainder of the day, but they managed to secure positions: Eli as a stable hand at a freight company, Josephine as an assistant to a dressmaker who needed someone who could read and write to manage her accounts. The pay was modest, but it would cover their basic needs while they waited for Marshall Cooper's investigation. That night, in their small rented room, they allowed themselves to imagine a future in Tucson, a home of their own, perhaps children someday. It was a tenuous dream, hanging on the Marshals' decision and the looming threat of Reeves and Garrison's arrival. But it was theirs, and they clung to it. The next morning, Eli reported to the stables for his first day of work. The job was familiar and, despite his still healing shoulder, he found comfort in the routine of caring for horses and maintaining tack. Josephine had gone to the dressmaker's shop, a small but reputable establishment near the town center. It was midday when Eli felt a prickling sensation at the back of his neck, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. He glanced up from the harness he was repairing to see a man leaning against the stable entrance, observing him with cold eyes. "Been looking for you, Xander," the man said, straightening. "Name's Mitchell. I work for Mr. Garrison." Eli's hand moved subtly toward the knife at his belt. "What do you want?" "Just to deliver a message." Mitchell smiled unpleasantly. "Mr. Garrison and Mr. Reeves arrived in town this morning. They know you're here and they know about your wife." Eli's blood ran cold. "If they touch her—" Now, Mitchell interrupted. "No need for threats. They're offering you a deal." He pulled out a folded paper. "This here's a promissory note for $1,000. All you have to do is leave your wife and Tucson behind. Start fresh somewhere else." Eli stared at him in disbelief. "They think I'd abandon my wife for money?" Mitchell shrugged. "Mr. Garrison thought you might be more reasonable than your brother was. Said every man has his price." Rage burned through Eli. It took all his self-control not to lunge at the messenger. "Get out," he said through clenched teeth. "Tell Garrison and Reeves I'll see them in hell first." "They thought you might say something like that." Mitchell tucked the note away. "That's why they're having a chat with your wife right now." Terror replaced rage in an instant. "What?" "Oh, don't worry. They're civilized men. They're just explaining the situation to her." Mitchell's smile widened. "Of course, if you're not interested in their generous offer, they might have to take more direct measures." Eli was moving before he consciously decided to, shoving past Mitchell and running toward the street. The dressmaker's shop was 5 blocks away. He sprinted through the crowded thoroughfare, ignoring shouts of protest as he pushed past pedestrians. When he reached the shop, he found the door ajar. Inside, the dressmaker sat trembling behind her workbench, a cut on her forehead. "Where is she?" Eli demanded. "Where's my wife?" "They took her," the woman whispered, clearly terrified. 3 men. Said if she came quietly, no one would get hurt. When I tried to stop them, one of them hit me." "Which way?" "South, toward the old mission." Eli ran back into the street, looking frantically in every direction. A boy was tending horses nearby, watching the commotion with interest. "Did you see 3 men with a red-haired woman?" Eli asked him urgently. The boy nodded. "They put her in a wagon. Went that way." He pointed south. The lady didn't look happy. Eli pressed a coin into the boy's hand and took off in the direction indicated. The old mission sat on the outskirts of town, a partially abandoned structure that dated back to Spanish rule. It would be an ideal place to hold someone isolated yet close enough to town for convenience. He needed help, but there was no time to return to the marshal's office. As he ran, he formulated a desperate plan. The mission had multiple entrances and plenty of hiding places. If he could get inside undetected, perhaps he could free Josephine before Reeves and Garrison carried out whatever they had planned. The mission came into view, its adobe walls weathered by time, its bell tower still standing against the desert sky. A wagon was hitched outside, confirming his suspicions. Eli approached cautiously, circling to the rear of the structure where a small door led to what had once been the priest's quarters. It was locked, but the adobe around it had crumbled with age. With determined effort, he widened a gap in the wall enough to squeeze through. Inside, the air was cool and still, dust motes dancing in the shafts of sunlight that penetrated the high windows. Voices echoed from the main chapel area. Eli moved silently through the corridors, drawing his revolver as he approached. Through a partially open door, he could see into the chapel. Josephine sat on a wooden bench, her hands tied before her. Despite her situation, her posture remained defiant. Frederick Garrison paced before her, impeccably dressed as always. Victor Reeves stood to one side, his scarred face impassive. Two other men guarded the main entrance. "Your husband rejected our generous offer, Mrs. Xander," Garrison was saying. "I find that disappointing but not surprising. The Xander brothers always were obstinate." "What did you expect?" Josephine replied, her voice steady despite the fear Eli could see in her eyes. "That he'd abandon me for money? You don't know him at all." "Perhaps not," Garrison conceded. "But I do know men like him understand consequences." He nodded to Reeves, who moved toward Josephine with menacing purpose. Eli had seen enough. He stepped into the doorway, gun raised. "Touch her and you die first, Reeves." All eyes turned to him. Garrison recovered quickly from his surprise, a cold smile spreading across his face. "Mr. Xander, how predictable of you to attempt a rescue." He signaled to the guards, who drew their weapons. "Put down your gun. You're outnumbered." "Maybe," Eli acknowledged. "But I'll make sure you don't live to enjoy your victory." The standoff hung in the air, tension crackling like lightning before a storm. Then a new voice entered the fray. "I'd reconsider those odds, Garrison." Marshal Cooper stepped through the main entrance, shotgun in hand. Behind him were 3 deputies, all armed. "This is a private matter, Marshal," Garrison said smoothly. "Nothing that concerns the law. Kidnapping a woman in broad daylight? Threatening her husband?" Cooper's voice was hard. "Seems like the law's business to me." Reeves' hand moved toward his gun. "We can handle this ourselves." "I wouldn't," one of the deputies warned. "Marshall's a crack shot, and he's been itching to demonstrate." For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Then Garrison raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. "There's been a misunderstanding," he said. "We were merely having a discussion with Mrs. Xander about her husband's legal troubles." "Discussion?" Cooper repeated skeptically. "With her hands tied?" Eli moved to Josephine's side, cutting her bonds while keeping his gun trained on Reeves. "Are you hurt?" he asked quietly. She shook her head, rubbing her wrists. "Just angry." Marshal Cooper stepped further into the chapel. "Mr. Garrison, Mr. Reeves, you're under arrest for kidnapping and assault. Your men too." "On whose authority?" Garrison demanded indignantly. "Do you know who I am?" "I know exactly who you are," Cooper replied. "I received some interesting telegrams this morning. Seems there are witnesses in Wickenburg who saw your men beat Thomas Xander nearly to death over a land dispute. And even more interesting, there's a federal investigation into your companies. Aggressive land acquisition tactics." Garrison's composure faltered. "That's absurd. Those witnesses are lying." "We'll let a judge sort that out," Cooper said calmly. "Along with the matter of your friend Walsh paying men to hunt down a woman for refusing his advances. That's not how we do things in the Arizona territory." As the deputies moved to disarm and handcuff the men, Eli held Josephine close, hardly daring to believe what was happening. After months of running, years of seeking justice for Thomas, it seemed the law was finally on their side. "Is it over?" Josephine whispered against his chest. "I think it might be," he replied, equally stunned. Marshal Cooper approached them as his deputies led the prisoners out. "You two all right?" "Yes," Eli said. "Thank you, Marshal. I don't know how to repay you." Cooper shook his head. "No need. Just doing my job." He handed Eli a folded paper. "This arrived this morning, too, from Judge Hollister in Prescott. It's a formal statement clearing your wife of any wrongdoing regarding Edgar Walsh." Seems several women came forward with similar stories once they heard someone had actually stood up to him. Josephine took the paper with trembling hands. "And Eli? What about the charges against him?" Cooper's expression grew more serious. "That's more complicated. You did kill those men, Xander. Can't just sweep that aside." Eli nodded, accepting this reality. "I understand. However," the marshal continued, "given the circumstances and the evidence of the railroad's involvement in your brother's death, Judge Hollister is willing to consider a reduced sentence, possibly even probation, if you agree to testify against Garrison in the federal case." It wasn't complete exoneration, but it was far more than Eli had dared hope for. "I'll testify to whatever I know," he promised. "Good." Cooper placed a hand on his shoulder. "In the meantime, you're free to remain in Tucson under my supervision. I'll need your word you won't leave town until this is all sorted out." "You have it," Eli assured him. "We're not running anymore." In the weeks that followed, Eli and Josephine began to build the life they had only dared to dream about. They continued their jobs, saved what money they could, and rented a small adobe house on the eastern edge of town. With each passing day, the fear of pursuit faded a little more. Frederick Garrison and Victor Reeves remained in custody, awaiting trial for multiple charges. Edgar Walsh, faced with mounting accusations from women in Flagstaff, found his influence rapidly diminishing. The web of power that had seemed so impenetrable was unraveling thread by thread. 3 months after their arrival in Tucson, Eli testified before a federal judge about the railroad's tactics and his brother's murder. His testimony, combined with that of other witnesses, ensured that Garrison would spend years in prison. Reeves, as the man who had delivered the fatal beating to Thomas, received an even harsher sentence. As for Eli himself, the judge, impressed by his cooperation and moved by the circumstances that had driven him to violence, sentenced him to 2 years probation. He would remain under Marshal Cooper's supervision, but he was free to live his life and support his wife. It was more than just legal redemption. As Eli and Josephine walked home from the courthouse after the sentencing, a weight seemed to lift from his shoulders, a burden of grief and rage he had carried since finding Thomas's body. "Are you all right?" Josephine asked, noticing his pensive expression. "I am," he realized with some surprise. "For the first time in a long while, I truly am." She squeezed his hand. "Thomas would be proud of you." "I hope so." Eli looked up at the clear Arizona sky. "I think he'd like you, Josie. He always said I needed someone smart to keep me in line." They continued toward home, talking of practical matters, the garden Josephine had started, the possibility of Eli finding work as a horse trainer now that his case was resolved. It was ordinary conversation, the kind shared by any married couple, and its very normalcy was precious to them both. As they approached their house, Eli noticed a figure sitting on their small porch. His hand moved instinctively toward his gun until he recognized the visitor. "Martha Jenkins?" Josephine exclaimed in surprise. The elderly woman stood, smiling broadly. "There you are. Been waiting most of the day. What are you doing in Tucson?" Eli asked as they hurried to greet her. "Selling my place," Martha replied matter-of-factly. "Too much for me to manage alone anymore. Thought I'd come see how you two were faring before I head to my sisters in California. They welcomed her inside, sharing the news of the trial's outcome over coffee. Martha listened with satisfaction, nodding at the justice finally served. "And you too?" she asked. "You settling in here for good?" Josephine glanced at Eli before answering. "We think so. Eli's probation means we need to stay in the area, and we've started to make a home here." "Good," Martha approved. "Speaking of which, I brought you something." She reached into her bag and withdrew a small wooden box. "A wedding present. Late, but better than never." Inside the box lay 2 gold rings, simple but well crafted. "They were mine and my husband's," Martha explained. "No children to pass them to, and they ought to be worn by people who understand what marriage really means, standing by each other through everything." Touched beyond words, Josephine embraced the older woman while Eli stammered his thanks. "Just be happy," Martha told them. "That's thanks enough." After Martha departed for her sister's home, Eli and Josephine stood on their porch in the gathering dusk, the rings now on their fingers tangible symbols of the commitment they'd made in Pine Creek. "What do you think the future holds for us now?" Josephine asked, leaning against her husband's shoulder. Eli considered the question. 6 months ago, he couldn't have imagined standing here, a free man with a home and a wife he adored. The path from that blood-soaked night outside Seligman to this peaceful evening in Tucson had been unimaginably difficult, yet it had led him exactly where he needed to be. "I think," he said slowly, "that we build something good here, something lasting." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I think we find work that matters, make friends, maybe even start a family when the time is right." "A family?" she repeated, her eyes bright with emotion. "I'd like that. And I think," he continued, "that we never forget what brought us here, not the pain and the running, but the courage it took to keep going, to trust each other when trusting anyone seemed impossible." Josephine nodded, understanding perfectly. "Redemption," she said softly. "Just like you told the judge today, not erasing the past, but finding a way to build something good despite it." "Exactly." Eli pulled her close. "And we found it together." As the stars began to appear in the desert sky, they stood wrapped in each other's embrace, no longer fugitives, no longer running, but home at last. The price on Eli's head was gone, replaced by the immeasurable value of the life they now shared. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them as they had faced every danger since that night in the abandoned barn together, with courage and with love. 1 year later, on a bright spring morning, Eli stood in the yard of their expanded home, watching as Josephine hung laundry on the line, her belly rounded with their first child. The garden she had started now flourished, providing vegetables for their table and flowers for their windows. Behind the house, for fine horses grazed in a corral Eli had built himself. His probation had ended early for good behavior, but they had no desire to leave Tucson. Eli had established a reputation as one of the finest horse trainers in the territory, while Josephine had opened a small school for children whose families couldn't afford the town's formal education. They had found more than safety here. They had found purpose, community, and a deep sense of belonging neither had known before. The nightmares that had once plagued them both came less frequently now, replaced by dreams of the future. As Josephine finished with the laundry, she caught him watching and smiled, that same radiant smile that had first captured his heart in the abandoned barn. She crossed the yard to join him, taking his hand and placing it over the spot where their child kicked vigorously. "He's strong," Eli remarked, wonder in his voice. "Like his father," she replied, her free hand touching the scar on his shoulder, a permanent reminder of their journey together. They stood there in the morning sunlight, 2 people who had found each other in the darkest of circumstances and forged something beautiful from danger and fear. The price on Eli's head, once his greatest burden, had become the catalyst for his greatest blessing, for it had led him to Josephine, to redemption, and finally to home.